You are watching Notepad. I'm your host, Ibrahim Sani. This is our very first episode broadcasting from the Asia Broadcasting Centre, or ABC, here in Bukit Jalil. This is our new home of Astro, AWANI. We are delighted to have Dr. Veerinderjeet Singh, the non-executive chairman of Tricor, joining us and being the first host, or guest, pardon me, of the new show. Dr. Veerinderjeet, thanks for gracing us with your presence. I know it's going to be not going to be easy navigating through the traffic, but of course it's nice of you to be our first guest, or among our first guests in our new place.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
The last time we spoke about was a rather thorough conversation when it comes to corporate governance. And we want to prolong that conversation even further, because I think the role of accountants in this country as guardians or safekeepers of good governance in the country needs to be talked about.
Yeah.
Malaysia Incorporated is under attack, so to speak. M-Bank very recently I had to pay off a penalty. MOF is still busy collecting penalties from all the other institutions. Goldman Sachs, for instance, was asked to pay.
But they call it settlements, not penalties.
Settlements, okay. The thing about these things is that if we don't do something structural, it's going to repeat itself.
Yeah.
What's your overview of the situation right now?
Well, I think when you look at the overall view of governance and financial reporting, there are many players in this particular scheme ecosystem. And I think that the limelight seems to move to the auditors so very frequently, when actually they are not the only ones in the game. So my view here is that we have many legislative provisions. Are they adequate? Many people would say they are adequate. Like always, it's all good in paper. The difficulty is always about when is enforcement activated. When does one want to take actions? Regulatory actions, and that is where sometimes you can find that the authorities can do better. And similarly, when you look at the other individuals along the ecosystem, it's about, I've said this many times in various forums, it's all about the individuals, besides training, besides technical knowledge, besides all your learning that you do, is the ethical aspect as well. And what is right, what is wrong.
But something must be going wrong, because financial scandals continue
Sure.
to be unearthed.
Everywhere. It's not only in Malaysia, we talk about, as you know, it's happened in many jurisdictions. And I think the challenge here is really about someone dropping the ball. But actually it's not one person dropping the ball, it's many along the chain. Now, I think we all know that fraud can be done by way of collusion, right? So you usually have in the usual way a maker-checker kind of provision. The maker and checkers both are in collusion, a system can fail. Of course, you then say, I have outside people, parties which can give assurance. And they can only give assurance by looking at a few sample transactions. Right? There's no such thing as a 100% check. So at the end of the day, if people know where the issues are and how they can hide their tracks, it becomes even more difficult.
But okay, so this is the problem when it comes to 1MDB. KPMG and Deloitte gave a qualified assurance upon the accounts of 1MDB. PwC refused to take up the offer until and unless things were changed. Things did change, and then now they are in there. When it comes to Tabung Haji, there's an issue about the 2019 annual report, if I'm not mistaken. We've crossed that, we've crossed into 2020, and still no annual report. Bausted, same problem with LTAT. I mean, come on, the list goes on.
Yeah, but then you're talking again about the auditors. So we also need to manage the situation of the preparers of financial statements, right? So the CFOs, what happened? Of course, sometimes CFOs report to CEO. So what happened to the CEOs? Then you look at the audit committees, then you look at the board, then you look at regulators as well, and then as well the auditors. So these are the players, and to be fair, everyone has a role, but you tend to find that many try to cut out of that particular angle and say this is not my fault, this is my fault. So you need multiple angles from which you should take action, and I think some of us see it as selective sometimes, how you pursue it. and pursue action. So to me, it's a multitude of parties.
You wear many hats. One of them is, of course, President of the Malaysian Institute of
Yeah.
Accountants, and as a professional body setting the standard of this occupation, do you feel that you need to do more, or at least MIA needs to do more?
Well, I think if you're looking at the standards, accounting standards, those are being handled by the Malaysian Accounting Standards Board. And invariably follow the International Financial Reporting Standards. So that's one. If you're
The
looking
MASB,
right?
it's IFSB,
Yes.
localized.
Yes. And then when you look at auditing standards, we have international auditing standards. So Malaysia generally adopts it with some modification from time to time. And MIA has got an auditing standards board as well, which looks at all this, right? The MIA also has got an ethics standards board now within MIA, and that looks again the international ethics rules and codes. So we adopt those. So we adopt the auditing standards, we adopt the ethics code, accounting standards, MASB. So as accountants and auditors, you then have to apply all this in the context of your work. So if you look at a professional, one is professional body, the other is a regulator. So the MIA is also a regulator. And the issue there is about actually the only way we can regulate somebody is if there is a complaint, right? And then you have to go through the process of investigation.
Why can't you instigate the investigation?
The law doesn't provide those powers, right? It's only upon a complaint. Now,
do you feel that laws need to be changed to allow for both complaints to be acted upon and investigations to be carried out?
Yeah, but if you look at any other professional body, like the Malaysian Institute of Certified Public Accountants or ACCA or ICAW, they can only do an investigation upon a complaint.
Okay.
Right? The difference about MIA being a regulator is that it actually can receive complaints from anyone. In the context of other professional bodies, is only from members, right? So in that sense, the MIA has a bigger role. And then after that, you do the investigations and fact-finding, and then you have discussions with the parties, and you have to have committee listening to all that. And then, as you know, in some situations, the members who are being looked at in terms of potential transgression of ethics rules may bring lawyers into the picture. And then in the end of the day, the whole chain of processes in which we fix our dates and all that can get delayed because of many things. You need quorums, you need people. So, but at the end of the day, we have a process, and that process is, in my mind, working. Question for us is, if I speak on the basis of what MIA's process is, we only have one committee which is looking at the investigation cases. We have only one committee which looks at disciplinary cases after it goes from the IC to the DC. Now, this is where reform is required, and we are in the process of asking government to make changes to the Accountants Act. Why? Because we are saying we should have multiple panels. Right now, under our legislative provisions of the Accountants Act, we cannot constitute multiple panels to take up hearings.
This is what, MIA bylaws?
MIA bylaws. MIA Act as well, and bylaws. So one major reform that we do see happening, because I think that will be done together with other reforms relating to the accountancy profession, is allowing multiple panels to be set up.
What was the reaction from the government upon bringing this to them?
I think this has been tabled longer than 1 year. This has been something we've said for almost 4 or 5 years.
Okay.
The only issue is there were many other changes that were being contemplated. And so the idea was, let's study all the collective needs and then see how we can bring a change in the Act once and for all.
Why not just have a catch-all Act, and then as time progresses, you just create,
well, that's the thing. As our reform of the Accountants Act actually has taken us very long. And the reason is because we've had 3 governments changing along the way, okay, and 3 finance ministers. And then the issue is all about the focus and the importance of, you're putting things up, stack up there. This is the first priority, second priority, and therefore this kind of stuff falls below. All these failures tells you that you perhaps need to bring this right at the top of the agenda. So we're hoping government will realize that. And to be fair, the government is aware of this, at least in terms of Ministry of Finance and the Accountant General's Department, and they will be making changes. But we are waiting for a collective discussion. There's a discussion going on.
Other than the multiple layers of committees, what would be some other
The
reforms?
other possible changes that should be is, in fact, the penalties or fines that we can make on members who may have run foul of our ethics code. And the maximum fine, if we, this may be small to many people, is only 5,000 ringgit. If the person is fined for transgressing the ethics code.
Well, if the law says 5,000 ringgit, then it's 5,000 ringgit lah.
So that law needs to be amended, and that also is in the scheme of things. We have already submitted that long ago. The other thing is obviously about this issue. About can we deal with others, and this is another side of the game. There are many other persons in the ecosystem who claim to be offering accounting services, but are not members of the Malaysian Institute of Accountants. Now, the word accountant is actually protected under the Accountants Act. In order to say I'm providing accounting services, you must be a member of the MIA.
It's a fraternity.
Yes, but there are others who offer accounting services. You can see, it's interesting, when you look at the papers, some people advertise here and there offering various tax services and other financial accounting services, and they are not members.
It's not even technically breaking the law, they are literally breaking the law.
Yes, so these are what we call bogus accountants.
Okay, but hang on, there's no actions that were taken against them.
Let me tell you, the Malaysian Institute of Accountants cannot take action against those people. And why? The Act is, again, needs amendment. It only allows us to take action against members of MIA. So therein lies this conundrum of issues.
I'm sorry, it's a strange conundrum to be in.
That's the thing. So this is historical. The Act was there since 1967. We've had a few tinkling with it.
Yes, the internet came along the way and everything else,
And one of the very, very interesting things we also need to change in the Act is obviously allowing us to have virtual meetings, right?
So I'm going to touch on that, about the virtual AGMs and...
So we are in the process, and I think we're changing that, but that's for the future. And the case at hand about all these scandals and all that, really, at the end of the day, MIA is doing what we do within the law. People get impatient because decisions are not made on disciplinary cases, and the reason is there are many delays, many processes. Fact-finding itself can take you months, and there are now also members who may raise issues like my human rights issue. How can you censure me when you are going against some people even say federal constitution? Whatever you're doing against me is going against my rights, and that's the kind of innovative type of silly arguments that come up as well.
But
so
if I graduate with a law degree and I'm not called to the bar, you can't practice. I can't practice, yes. and the fraternity will come down hard on me. What is the parallel there? Is the Bar Council working in the same way the MIA is? Therefore, they can't act until there is a complaint, or they. I don't know whether we're familiar with.
I believe the Bar Council has a wider reach, and they can do more. And that's where the Malaysian Institute of Accountants needs to actually have sufficient power similar to the Bar Council. We are probably similar to the architects, the doctors, and so on and so forth. So we need to ramp up this particular change. And that will give the MIA the regulatory role where we go after anyone who says they're offering accounting services, despite the fact they're not our members or members. It makes no difference. That's what a regulator should behave that way. Our conundrum that we face in the Malaysian Institute of Accountants is that we are also a professional body. And that perhaps needs to be looked at. And these are discussions that are going on in the Accountant General's Department, and there's a committee that's just recently been formed, and we're looking at all these changes.
Fantastic. We'll go for a quick break. When we come back, we'll have Dr. Veerinderjeet Singh explaining to us about the financial reporting preparers in the pursuit of upholding good corporate governance. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. I have with me Dr. Veerinderjeet Singh. He is the non-executive chairman of Tricor, here talking about the profession of accountants and how to improve the general overview of Malaysia Incorporated. Dr. Verinder, let's talk a little bit more about the preparers of financial accountants.
Sure.
We're talking about the multifaceted elements
Yes.
of it. We all kind of are familiar with the role of a
Yeah.
CFO, CEO,
I'm sure.
board of governors,
Yes.
auditors, but it seems like when it comes to government-linked companies or government-linked investment companies, that same amount of scrutiny is a little bit different than, say, private companies. There's also an argument that needs to be made that if a publicly listed company flaunts any form of regulation, Bursa Malaysia or SC can come down hard.
Yes, yes.
But the same kind of penalty is not seen in Malaysian-linked government companies. And it's not even a suspicion that I have, it's the fact.
Yeah, but when you say GLCs or government-linked companies, many of them are listed. So then they're taken care of in the context of the listed listing requirements, Bursa and so on, right? And all of them would have board of governors and board of directors, audit committees.
Yeah,
so
but for example, Bank was asked to pay the settlement to MOF. The regulators were not in this conversation. That's the example that I'm trying to draw upon.
That's the government of Malaysia came out with that settlement, which includes all the regulators.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a collective thing that regulators were involved. Now, in the case of Berhad companies, which are not listed, you still are subject to the Companies Commission Act, Companies Act, you're subject to the various other requirements, but you're not subject to a listing requirement. So Bursa cannot act on you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And the Securities Commission only looks at certain types of public interest kind of issues. So maybe what you should look at is, if you're looking at GLCs, I think the point to be made is GLCs in Malaysia play a very prominent role, right? So if they are listed, I think that's covered through the Bursa Malaysia, through the Code of Corporate Governance, all that applies. So I think they can be monitored.
You're talking about like Pelaburan National Berhad, Khazanah Berhad, Khazanah National Berhad, those kind of.
They're all.
Yeah, Berhad, but not listed.
And they're Berhads, but they're not listed. So what about those? And those, again, you go back to board of directors, right? Audit committees are also there, board of directors are also there, auditors are also there. And so the question really at the end of the day is, I think, reporting of transgressions, right? Listed companies would have probably a higher level of reporting. Berhads, let's say public companies which are not listed, perhaps have a lower level. And Sendirian Berhads or private companies would have an even lower level. But remember, the threshold is the Companies Act. And then when you go listing, you have more layers. So question that arises is, if you are referring to public interest entities, and perhaps government of Malaysia owned entities should be all considered public interest entities. So you come back to this question of 1MDB. And they were not subjected to the kind of scrutiny that listed companies would. So the question therefore is, perhaps in the legislation that we have, maybe this kind of entities, which are public interest entities, should also be having the kind of reporting requirements that perhaps some listed companies have.
There's a lot of perhaps here. Do you feel strongly about this?
I certainly think that if I, as a taxpayer, right, and you as a taxpayer, both of us are taxpayers.
Unfortunately, there's very few of us here among the working group. I just came across a good number here.
Yes.
7% of total Malaysian
15,
labour.
I think about 15.
No, 15% of labour force. 7% of Malaysians pay taxes.
So the question is this: if, as long as the government of Malaysia owns an entity, and it will all be considered a Berhad, it becomes a public interest entity. I think that has to be clarified and must be clarified, and therefore there is a greater reporting requirement that should be enforced. So the law has to be changed to cover that. I think our experiences in 1NDB tells us that. Right?
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just frustrated here.
Yes.
I feel these changes are deeply needed.
Yes.
I don't hear it at all.
Yes, there's no discussion, and this is where I am, as a citizen, I'm concerned. Why aren't the regulators talking about this? Why aren't changes being considered?
I can understand why the lawmakers don't want it, because why would this is impeding their own behaviors in these kind of entities. But regulators need to be stronger, right?
Well, yeah, agree. So regulators need to put it up. And remember one thing, regulators need to put it up to the lawmakers and to the government first. And sometimes you may get a pushback, right? But whatever said and done, you have accountability. You need to push it up. And then in the end of the day, Parliament is apparently had so many select committees that were set up. And some of these regulators perhaps should come within the purview of the parliamentary select committees rather than having a direct link to ministries, right? So that's another way of breaking that so-called link where you get the implication or implied interests of a ministry in an entity, and therefore you may get directions from
It's no longer implied, Dr. Veerinderjeet, it's rather explicit
well,
about the whole thing.
Yeah. Look, let me just point out this. Some entities are run quite well, but
Mara Incorporated
some entities are
has
not.
an MP
Yes.
as, I don't know, chairman or
Well,
CEO.
that comes by the governance, right? Who should be involved in the chairmanship and so on. So you've seen a slew of changes in the GLCs and various government linked entities. Is that in line with corporate governance?
No, it's not.
So the answer there is, why aren't the relevant regulators speaking up on this issue?
Okay.
Right.
Some businesses may not have a clear link to regulators, other than perhaps SSM, the Companies Commission, and because of that, they kind of slip through the cracks. We're talking about entities, corporate entities, incorporated bodies within ministries, for instance. Terkini, for example, you know, that kind of stuff.
Which may not be set up as companies.
Yeah.
It may be set up as some kind of
foundation or yayasan.
And that brings us to another issue. Why is that so? And who is accountable for that? And so, yes, you're right. A number of other, there's so many initiatives that the government has issued.
Too many even, because government is now in business. That's a problem.
And you lose track about all these organization acronyms that are being floated around. And I personally think that when you tell the rakyat there are so many funding opportunities, so many initiatives under this organization A, B, C, D, you will find that actually the rakyat gets confused. I mean, where do I go to, and what are these organizations? So why do we do that? And that's a question for the government to consider. Maybe it should all be under a particular entity in the ministry and not create so many levels, because then the accountability comes into play. Who is really accountable? It should be the ministry concerned, but then the ministry is subject to the Auditor General's audits, and that reports comes out years later.
Plenty of things that needs to be talked about.
Yes.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time.
Yes.
But that's it. That's our first episode of Notepad in the News Studio. If you've missed any part of this episode, just head on to astroawani.com, look for Notepad over there. And remember, I have had a conversation with Dr. Veerinderjeet over Skype on the topic of corporate governance. Do search for that as well. Till then, thanks very much for watching, and see you again in the next episode.